Hey guys, Metal Jesus here, and I am back with a review and some gameplay, and really me just talking about the awesome arcade racing game called Onrush. This was captured on my PlayStation 4 Pro, running in glorious 4K. This video is going to be a bit of an expansion I did on a PlayStation 4 Hidden Gems video that I did I guess probably about a month ago, but in that video I wanted to talk about Onrush and highlight it because it is one of those very unique arcade racing games that sadly was not a success, at least not as much as the original publisher had hoped for. And so it kind of came and went, and it's such a bummer. Now, to be clear though, this also did come out on the Xbox One, and both versions of it are backwards compatible on the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. So it's pretty easy to find a copy of this, fairly inexpensive if you go to GameStop. That's actually where I bought the PS4 version from. I originally did play this game on the Xbox One, but I wanted it for that PS4 video. It's the reason why you are seeing me kind of starting over at the beginning. I originally played this much more on the Xbox One. So, but it's one of those games, and I'm sure you guys have these in your collection, where sometimes if you have to start over, you have no problem with that. It's so much fun that you just kind of almost look forward to restarting a game. You know, remember back in the day, you delete your save games just to start over and get that fresh feeling. I can't tell you how many times I've done that on SSX Tricky and SSX 3. And so, yeah, you know, Onrush is one of those games where I was like, oh, okay, I don't have the PS4 version. I want to talk about it in that video, so let's go buy it. So what's going on with Onrush and what makes it unique? Well, basically, this is a arcade-style combat game. And what's interesting about it is that it, unlike a lot of traditional racing games, there is no finish line. This game is all about team play and basically trying to take out or get more points than the opposing team. And so the way that this starts off with is that you choose the style of game, and I'm going to talk about that here in a second. But basically, you have 12 cars on the track plus some computer-created ones that you see there. But for the most part, the two teams are two teams of 6, and you basically are, like I said, in this version, you're trying to do overdrive, which basically means that in this race right here, the teams are trying to outscore each other by boosting. And the way you boost is primarily by knocking each other out or knocking into each other or doing really cool things off of jumps. And it's timing based, and so in that way, it feels very much like a first-person online multiplayer game where you're just basically trying to beat the tar out of each other, you know, it's very unique in that regards. In many ways, I kind of feel like the reason why perhaps it didn't connect with people was because it's a little bit confusing and a little bit different than the traditional arcade racing game. Now, what's interesting about it is that the developer of this, or at least some of the people that worked on this, worked on another game that's similar, and that is the MotorStorm series on the PlayStation 3. But in those games, you did have a finish line, and so their goal was for this one to make it a little bit more exciting and kind of bring in some of that online multiplayer feel to it, even though you don't necessarily have to play with people online. But I do feel like that because there is no finish line, that some people maybe it didn't connect with. I know the first couple times I played this, I wasn't entirely sure what to do and why I would be either winning or losing. The best way to think of this game is that it's kind of like if you were to take the road rage mode in Burnout and just make an entire game around it. That's kind of how this plays. And so let's talk about the graphics, because I do think this is a very nice looking game. And in many ways, if you've played the previous MotorStorm games, you're going to feel right at home here, because it looks and plays very similar to that. It's got that sort of post-apocalyptic style to it, which I really appreciate. One thing I really like about the MotorStorm games, especially some of the later ones, is that they weren't just gray and brown and depressing. And I kind of feel like that this game is a nice mix of that as well. It's post-apocalyptic, but there's color in there, and it's, you know, it's an arcade racing game. You want to, I don't know, it's like you don't want to be too depressing, right? And I feel like that this does a good job of that. Also, it runs really well. Like, you're seeing it right here in 60 frames per second, and man, it's flying along. It's running really well. Another thing about this is that it is, on my machine, running in HDR. Now, what's interesting about HDR is that the Elgato will capture it, at least the Elgato game capture that I have. But then you bring it into Final Cut and you start dealing with YouTube. The HDR can be a little bit of a challenge. I'm still apprehensive in just uploading raw HDR because, so for those of you who don't know, that stands for high dynamic range, meaning that when I get this footage straight off of the Elgato, it's kind of blown out looking. And what I end up having to do to make it so that everyone can see it and everyone can enjoy this video is I manually go into Final Cut and I basically color correct it. I kind of bring it down into normal ranges so that it doesn't look weird. But just be aware though that if you have a PS4 Pro or you have the PS5 and you have a newer television, you will get that HDR high dynamic range. Again, I don't know if most people care about that sort of stuff. To be honest, you know, you're watching this video on YouTube, it's streaming, there's compression, all that sort of stuff. So I tend to remove it because I want the maximum amount of people to watch this without it looking really weird. The other thing I should mention, and I've talked about this in some of my other videos, is that I typically turn off the in-game soundtrack and music when capturing these, especially in racing games, because often they have licensed music, and that can get me in a little bit of trouble with copyright on YouTube. And so the music that you're listening to actually is a instrumental guitarist that is, you know, okayed for YouTube. His name's Ethan Mixell. And if you like Joe Satriani, if you like Steve Vai, if you like Yngwie Malmsteen, he's kind of a mix of all of that stuff. And like I said, he's safe for YouTube. So if you're sitting there listening, it's like, wow, this music's really awesome. What is it? Well, it's Ethan Mixell. And he has a bunch of albums out. So I just kind of want to give him a shout out because I use his music a lot in my videos. It's really cool to be able to talk over it because it is instrumental. Plus, it's just amazing stuff. The guy can shred, but yet he's tasteful. You know, that's the thing about that. So I just want to give it a shout out to little, Ethan Mixell there because he's awesome. So yeah, overall, I really like Onrush. I do think it is a game that if you decide to pick it up, it's one that you have to kind of give some time to. It's going to be a little bit confusing. It's chaotic. There's other modes to this than Overdrive, which you see me playing here. There's one where you're trying to get through these gates. I think one of them is like elimination, or I forget what they call it. But yeah, there's other kinds of modes to play in this. And, overall, I think it's a AAA arcade racing game that just sadly, for whatever reason, did not find a big enough audience. But I do think that over time, it's going to be one of those games that, 5-10 years from now, I think people are going to be like, wow, remember playing Onrush? Remember when they used to have arcade racing games like that, Maybe these games are kind of expensive to make, and if it doesn't sell millions of copies, then the publisher can't really justify doing sequels or something like that. I'd be kind of curious to know what the developer is currently working on, or if they got shut down by Codemasters. Hopefully that's not the case. I'm watching this footage thinking it would be pretty easy for them to kind of take this style of gameplay and then maybe use it to reboot something like Wave Race or the Splashdown Rides Gone Wild games. It would be interesting for them to do that because, again, I think that they're actually similar styles of gameplay, the same types of chaotic, just everything going on, craziness, over-the-top arcade action. I don't know. It'd be interesting to be able to talk to some of these developers. Speaking of which, I had a developer reach out to me at one point because of my Splashdown video. This was a couple years ago, and I remember he just messaged me privately. He's like, he was really happy that I'd made that video because, again, that was another game that he felt was very underappreciated, and it was nice for him to see people out there that look back fondly on it. And I think that's the thing to remember with these kind of games, is that yes, they're big publishers putting them out, but ultimately they're made by people who are usually very passionate at what they're doing, and they're putting their heart and soul into this. And you know, it's got to be crushing to have a game come out and then one, not do well, but then two, maybe get shut down. So I actually jumped on the Wikipedia page, and yeah, it turns out that it looks like they let people go and then assimilated other people, or some of the team, into other teams to work on other games. So yeah, you know, hey, I mean, hopefully they all landed on their feet and are doing well. But anyways, guys, so that's my rambling review and thoughts on Onrush, a game that is awesome and, you know, should be remembered. So I want to thank you guys for watching my channel. Thank you for subscribing, and take care.